Alright, here's our 6 people.
1.
You were number 2. Alright.
Turn off.
Good job. Okay, sweet. Come back over here. Okay. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Started. 72.3%. That's the percentage of people living in Zimbabwe today that are living under the poverty line, according to the World Bank in 2016. Now, Zimbabwe is a little-known nation in sub-Saharan Africa, but it's facing a massive crisis for a country so small. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, and that's what I'll be informing you about today, the crisis in Zimbabwe. And we're going to look at 3 different facets of it: the agricultural crisis, the hyperinflation issue, and some potential solutions. So first, starting with the agricultural crisis, the New York Times reports on May 9, 2002, that former President Robert Mugabe had instituted an agricultural reform series in which he decided that African farmers could kick white farmers off of their land and claim it as their own without giving them any sort of financial restitution, which means that back in the early 2000s, almost all of the white farmers from Zimbabwe were driven out of the country and weren't given any money to pay for their land. The reason why this was problematic for the nation of Zimbabwe is because after the colonial period had started, where Europeans had come in and taken over the country, they switched the nation from running on a system of subsistence farming to commercial farming, with much larger farms and larger scale farming occurring. These African farmers who had been used to subsistence farming took over white commercial farms, but they didn't have the agricultural training to understand how to do farming on a larger scale. And this led to severe famines whenever the farms were mismanaged, because they refused to accept help from the previous farm owners whenever they offered to teach them how to manage their crops effectively. And this was incredibly detrimental to Zimbabwe because prior to the mid-2000s, it was one of the largest countries as far as agricultural output goes in sub-Saharan Africa. So this caused massive economic harm to the country, which leads to hyperinflation, the second facet of the Zimbabwean crisis. So according to Fin24, a South African financial website, tells us that in 2008, 95% of people in Zimbabwe were unemployed, and the inflation was at a world record 72.6 billion%. Inflation got so high in Zimbabwe that Robert Mugabe actually got rid of their former currency and switched to the American dollar, because his own nation's currency had gotten beyond the point of worthless. And so what this did to the people of Zimbabwe was it put them in a situation where they had no food, no jobs, and no money that they could actually use to purchase anything of worth. And then this crisis was only exacerbated by the fact that Robert Mugabe refused to actually do anything to stop the hyperinflation issue. In fact, he allowed his financial minister to make essentially the following claim: our country is poor and people don't have money. And so because I'm the Minister of Finance, I will print more money so that everybody can be rich. And that's what caused the problem, and he continued to do that until he decided to switch to the American dollar. Finally, we're going to look at some potential solutions to this issue. And one of the issues was put into effect relatively recently by the new president of Zimbabwe. In fact, according to CNN, on March 1st, 2018, the new president is now allowing for white farmers to take their farms back and work with the African farmers who own it currently to re-implement better commercial farming practices that will hopefully revitalize the nation. What this new program seeks to do is, now that they're working on the American dollar and we see some small economic gains, it's seeking to farm properly and increase agricultural output to revitalize the economy of the nation. Now that it has a new currency and new agricultural practices, hopefully in a couple of years, Zimbabwe's crisis will start to end. And so ultimately, when we re-examine the crisis in Zimbabwe, we looked at it through a couple of lenses: the agricultural crisis, the hyperinflation, and some possible solutions to this issue, so that one day, 72.3% people living under the poverty line will be nothing but a distant memory. Thank you. We'll go look at our 6 people again.
2.
That's a sleepy voice.